That's so
And
great.
we are recording, and
Wait.
if we can let everybody in. Okay. Assemblywoman, we're ready to go.
Hello, I'm Assemblymember Sharon Quirk-Silva, representing North Orange County, and welcome to my virtual breakfast club. We have done many of these in person, but have now been doing them virtually. And today we are thrilled to have Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis. Before I give you a little bit of background about our Lieutenant Governor, I wanted to do a few updates. First and foremost, I wanted to just say we stand with our brothers and sisters from the API community. We know how devastating it is, not just the recent attacks in this week by an individual, but really steadily increased in hate crimes against our API community. And it's simply has to stop. It's intolerable. And tomorrow in Fullerton, at the Fullerton City Hall at 3:00 p.m., we will be hosting a press conference with other North Orange County and other electeds throughout the county. We invite you to join us and stand together, stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters from the API community. Second, I wanted to also acknowledge to the families and to our community the thousands of people that we have lost, not only in Orange County, but throughout the United States to COVID-19. We hosted a memorial, COVID-19 memorial, and we're happy our local faith-based community join us, but we know that that pain doesn't stop. So still encourage you to be COVID testing if you COVID tested if you have any symptoms, but also to be vaccinated. We know that are going to be more and more opportunities, and we know this is really the only way we're going to be able to get back to normal. Secondly, we've been working hard in the legislative session. We are starting our hearings for presenting bills. I've already been able to present one of my housing bills that moved forward on consent. Dwelling unit bill that was a bill to be able to build ADUs on your property. I also have an additional quite a few bills that will be heading to the Home Housing Committee, as well as bills that would be heading to the Education Committee, and a variety of other bills that focus on women. We've spent a great deal of time working now as the Arts and Entertainment Chair to really get some response to starting to open up our theme park safely and swiftly. We know that a new blueprint has been presented, and this now will give the parks an opportunity start to begin to open. We know that Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm, Magic Mountain, and even Universal Studios have now set dates for reopening in a very much a moderate capacity, starting with 15% and possibly getting to 25%, and of course steadily increasing once the numbers go down and we change in tiers. We just held an informational hearing Wednesday on sports and youth sports, professional sports, park and recreation, and really how can we get our toddlers to teens to adults back to active living, as we know that really will make a huge difference, not only for physical health, but mental health. We know that people are really struggling right now. All too many lives have been put on hold, and that's extremely difficult for our teens, especially who were hoping to play that baseball season or football season. And I'll shout it out to the cheerleaders out there. We are going to be pretty bold about asking the state to relook at cheerleading on the sideline safely. If we can have our boys out there tumbling in football gear, we can have our girls out, girls and others out on the sidelines cheering. So that is a new effort we're going to be focusing on this week. We want to make sure we have some parity and gender equity. With that, we also know that our schools are starting to get back to school, having kids come face to face. That's encouraging. We know that for teachers, a huge shout out. They have been juggling, Zooming, juggling in student along with Zooms, which I can tell you my husband does that. He's a junior high teacher here in Fullerton, and that's not the easiest thing to do, have students sitting in your class and then being on Zoom as well. But they're doing the best they can, and we're excited that we're going to see head back. With that, I'm going to go ahead and start to talk about our special guest. And I've had the opportunity to meet our Lieutenant Governor in person more than a few times. We even happened to be on a delegation at the border. This was almost 2 years ago, of course, before COVID. And we were on the Mexico side, and she was doing her job as an international representative. But one of the things that really struck me is, you know, we so often think of California, but California really, not only its economy, but where we reach is international, and what we do at our borders, whether it's Canada, whether it's Mexico, is extremely important. At that point, we were talking about one of the things that is not very widely known, which is the Tijuana River. And many people don't realize that that can get very, very polluted. And then in turn, with big storms, that pollution goes right into our ocean, and we don't have a border in the ocean. So it's both of our jobs on both sides of the border to make sure that we can keep that, not only work to get it cleaned up, but to keep it safe for its habitat. And the Lieutenant Governor was right there, and we've had some big progress. So if you'd speak to that, that would be great. But our Lieutenant Governor, Eleni Kounalakis, she was sworn in as the 50th Lieutenant Governor in California by Gavin Newsom in 2019. She's the first woman elected to Lieutenant Governor of California. All right, give a little cheer out there, ladies. That is not an easy job. She's a native California, and she, in her job, has visited all 58 counties during her historic campaign. Her duties as a lieutenant governor mean that she focuses quite a bit on international affairs and trade. I know she'll be talking about that. But before she came to us as a lieutenant governor, she, from 2010 to 2013, she served as President Barack Obama's ambassador to the Republic of Hungary. Kounalakis was the first Greek American woman, and at the age of 43, one of America's youngest to serve as an ambassador. She has even written a book, her memoir called Madam Ambassador, and this talks about her 3 years of diplomacy. And I want to kind of highlight that word diplomacy, because it really is key to how we interact, not only with the world around us, but from other states and from person to person. We kind of have lost that diplomacy, and too much has happened where we have lost the ability to speak, to be courteous, to look from each other's lens, and we must bring that back if we're going to continue to get the things done that we need to get done. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and invite her to join us and welcome her. Welcome, Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis. Everybody say that, because I know I'm not saying it the right way. And then will you say it so we can say it the right way?
Well, thank you so much, Assemblywoman. It's Kounalakis, but if you remember my campaign ads, just call me Eleni. that's hard enough, to tell you the truth, even though it's shorter. But I'm just absolutely so thrilled and honored, Assemblywoman Quirk-Silva, that you invited me to join you at one of your breakfasts today. And thank you for your incredible leadership, your voice, your own use of diplomatic skills, in order to really be the voice of your constituents in Sacramento. And you are so effective and so highly respected. And I just want to make sure that all of those on this call know that. The other thing I wanted to recognize is I think that there are some local elected officials who are either on this call or might be watching on Facebook Live. I just want to thank you all for your service in your community. Local government is incredibly important, particularly during the pandemic, in keeping people informed and in helping to make sure that our cities, our counties, our school districts are all informed and able to function, again, particularly during this difficult time. And then to everybody else who's on, for whatever it is that motivates you to be engaged and involved with your Assemblywoman. You know, when I was serving overseas as ambassador in Hungary, I talked about democracy a lot. Civic involvement is absolutely essential, because democracy at its core is self-government. We choose our representatives to be our voice and do the day-to-day, but we are truly all in this together. So what I thought I would start by doing, Assemblywoman Quirk-Silva mentioned a little bit about my priorities, but Lieutenant Governor is one of those jobs where people will say, well, what exactly do you do? So I thought I would maybe very briefly talk a little bit about my job, what I do, what I focus on, and then turn to your questions. If you want to put questions in the chat, Assemblywoman, maybe you want to field them. Otherwise, I can go through. But I'd really like to address whatever's on your mind. And I actually just got a message from an old friend who asked the first question. So we have at least one place to start. So I was elected 2 years ago. My platform really started with public higher education. And that's because the Lieutenant Governor serves on the boards of the California State University System, the University of California System, so CSU and UC. And since I've been in this office, through cooperation and collaboration with the governor's office and the legislature, the Lieutenant Governor now sits on the board of the Community College Board of Governors. So the Lieutenant Governor, but myself in this position, am now the only elected official to sit on all three boards of our public higher education system. I heard a lot when I was out on the road from students, from educators, from alumni, of how important it is, and from employers, how important it is to do a better job making sure that these three systems are working together, talking to each other, so that we can really maximize what is one of the most important aspects of our society and our economy, which is our system of public higher education. We have 3 million students enrolled in our system, about a little over 2 million in the community college system, and then another about 850,000 between the CSU and the UC. So half, and again, as an educator, yourself, Assemblywoman Quirk-Silva, you're well aware of this, more than half of our state budget goes to education, more than half. Of course, K-12, and then public higher ed. So that's an area where I'm very focused, very engaged, and frankly, very passionate. A lot of that passion comes from my own personal experience. My grandmother in Greece never learned to read. They say she was smart as a whip. Raised her family during the Second World War and the Civil War after, but never spent a day in the classroom. She let my father come to the United States. He came here alone, no money, As a teenager, he went to the fields of California in Lodi to work as a farm worker, was taken in by teachers in the community, and ended up at Sacramento State, where he got a great education, started a business, changed the trajectory of my family. I was the first in my family to go to a four-year college and graduate. I ended up in graduate school at UC Berkeley, and I have walked down this pathway of the California dream, and millions of California families are engaged in doing this every day, and that pathway goes through our system of public higher ed. The second area where I'm very focused are environmental issues. As the Assemblywoman mentioned, we were on the other side of the border in Tijuana 2 years ago at the home of the Consul General, U.S. Consul General in Tijuana. And one of the big issues we were talking about and working on at the time was the pollution in the Tijuana River. It is absolutely unacceptable and outrageous that we have essentially what amounts to an open sewer. And the only way, again, as the Assemblywoman said, that we're going to resolve it is through collaboration and cooperation with the Mexican government and the local government in Tijuana. And we have made some good progress. You might have been following the USMCA, the agreement that was first negotiated by the Trump administration, and then our own Californian Speaker Nancy Pelosi got very involved and ensured that there were environmental provisions within the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement. And as a result, there are now funds through that agreement that have been allocated and are going to build some additional infrastructure on the U.S. side in order to be able to begin to tackle the cleanup. But it goes way beyond that. I am the chair of the State Lands Commission. We control about 5 million acres of land in California. Most of it is underwater, including off our coast 3 miles. One of the other things that's very important to me and was important during the first 2 years was stopping the Trump administration from their plans to open up our coast to more offshore drilling. We successfully did that. In fact, we have also reduced the footprint of offshore drilling in the 2 years that I have been in office. And we are looking to figure out how can we do a better job in advancing offshore wind. The third area where I am very focused is in the international space. And the governor, after we were elected, because I'm a former United States ambassador, you know, the governor is very busy. He gets calls from people around the world asking for meetings, and he doesn't have a lot of time for that. The fact of the matter is that having served as a U.S. ambassador in the world of diplomacy, you know, American ambassadors never lose their title. Once you've been an American ambassador, you're given the ability by the U.S. government to use that title for the rest of your life. It is an enormous honor for me. Those 3.5 years overseas were representing our beautiful country, were just very formative for me. So to be able to essentially be California's top diplomat is something that that I enjoy doing, but there is also truly a need, and the governor recognized that, and so we are working on this portfolio together. If ever I can get him to take high-level meetings, he has been very responsive, but a lot of the day-to-day meeting with consuls general, doing conferences around trade and investment. I work in coordination with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development and with the Governor's secretaries in this portfolio. So the areas that I have established and the Governor has accepted as California's top 3 international priorities start with climate change. So this dovetails with the work that I do on the State Lands Commission, but it's of course much broader. It goes to all of the things that we are doing in California in terms of tackling climate change. My first international trip was to China. I went just 2 months in to my job to the Belt and Road Initiative Conference. And we consider, as does, by the way, the Biden administration, climate to be a standalone international priority. So I did not go to speak with a different message on any of the other elements of Belt and Road that were being worked on by the last administration. No, I went specifically to talk about what California is doing in the space of environmental preservation, clean air, clean water, and climate, and to urge the Chinese government to do the same in their Belt and Road project. So that's just an example. Several visits to Mexico, and in fact, I led a trade mission to India just before the pandemic hit, primarily to sell more of our tree nuts. It's our most important foreign market for almonds, which you might know. So the three priorities, I'm sorry, I got off on a tangent, are climate change, trade, and immigration. And it's very important to me that California tells our story about immigration. Of course, the federal government controls the laws surrounding immigration, but we have a very important story to tell, and it's one that is needed now more than ever. And that is that we are 27% foreign born in our state. 1 out of 4 of us is an immigrant. It's extraordinary. Nationally, it's about 14%. 1 out of 2 of us, myself included, and I'm sure many of you on this call, have at least one parent who was born outside of the country. Connecting our economic and cultural success with our immigration profile is a success story that resonates in the world. So those are the priorities in my office, the issues that I'm working on. Maybe one more note, just because it's also important, the Assemblywoman mentioned, I'm the first woman ever elected Lieutenant Governor in our state. So of course I use what they call the bully pulpit of the Lieutenant Governor's office to talk about the importance of equity. And that is something that I find great joy in doing, but also great inspiration in hearing from so many others, because we have many firsts in our state.
Thank you. Well, I have a ton of questions, but I want to make sure that our guests are able to get their questions in. But before they do, I just want to make just a few comments on some of the, obviously the governor has his priorities, and you work closely with the governor. The legislative bodies, both the Senate and the Assembly, have their priorities. And then in all of this beauty of democracy, we hammer it out through the legislative process and through the budget. So some of the things that you mentioned, whether it be climate change, particularly there's many initiatives, but as you're weaving through answers, one of the things that continues to come up related to climate change, of course, is as we move from fossil fuel to clean energy, what are some things that you have seen that are really going to keep us competitive as far as jobs, but also as far as the infrastructure? Because if we just talk about electric vehicles, just that, I know that the auditor came out with a report saying, yes, there's some plans, but we're far behind in our goals. So I happen to come from the idea of looking at supporting many types of fuel, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's electric, like you said, not fuel, but wind, solar, kind of a combination versus just one focus because we hear about electric all the time. So I'll leave it there. And if you want to answer that, and then I'll let Joseph will moderate some of the questions. And Joseph Holper is my communications guy.
Wonderful, wonderful. So yeah, let me just reinforce, Assemblywoman, what you said about the checks and balances and the separations of power that we have in state government. And I just want to make one comment about that. We are very lucky in this state, because when you look at some of the toxicity that we see in the Congress, it is so different in Sacramento. There is always robust debate, but by and large, people get along. I mean, there is an honest debate over how best to address the challenges that we have. And it does make it a pleasure to be part of it and to work in state government when we're able to have, again, spirited debate over the best way forward, but always based on reason and logic and sound thinking. So energy, I come from a point of view that this is about the geopolitical stability of the planet, and the disruption that can and already has been created by a changing and warming climate. And I also come at this from a point of view of energy security. When I was in Hungary, one of our priorities was trying to encourage the European Union to diversify its sources and routes of bringing energy into Europe, which is primarily served by Russia. So there is a bigger context that I tend to think of this in, and I'm quite optimistic that we are going in the right direction. The question is, as you note, Sharon, are we going fast enough? Are we getting there fast enough? The reality is we can only go as fast as we can go, and there is a lot happening. One, right now, over half of the greenhouse gas emissions coming from our state are related to cars and light utility vehicles. So either about 40% from the emissions from the cars themselves driving on our roads, and another 10% or so from the refining of petroleum to fuel those cars. So the governor last year signed an executive order saying that by 2035, California will only allow new car sales to be zero emission vehicles. We are the largest consumer market in the country. So by setting that as our standard, what happens is you motivate car companies to figure out how to get there. I think you probably have all seen, whether it's Super Bowl ads or any other source that you have, there is a change happening out there around movement towards zero emission vehicles. Some of those are going to be battery powered. Some of those, as you note, Sharon, will be hydrogen. So right now we have a budget surplus, and in our efforts to invest in our recovery, a great deal of focus is on how to build the infrastructure that we will need, both for our grid, and by the way, that goes to prevention of wildfires and blackouts and all that as well, but also to the physical infrastructure to be able to support this significant change. And so one, it's the direction of California that will be good for meeting our goals, but two, it will drive the technology that is going to be able to be adopted elsewhere in the country and internationally as well. There's also, of course, lots of other things that we're going to have to do. Many different areas of research are being done on carbon capture, carbon sequestration. And this goes from the fields of California, where new techniques to be able to minimize the impact of cattle, to using different kinds of materials in our farming so that our soils are capturing and pulling back carbon out of the air as well. There's this incredible company called Stripe you might have heard about. Again, this is a great story that encapsulates everything. Two brothers, immigrants from Ireland, came to Silicon Valley, started their company, historically successful company. I think it's the biggest, the largest, it's like $90 billion company in private hands. But they are using part of their success to invest in technology around carbon capture. So a lot of this good stuff is happening out there. There's no question that we have a long way to go, but California, with being the place where there are more scientists, more Nobel Prize winners, more access to capital, and the history of innovation, the innovation culture, and the largest consumer market in the country. And of course, our public higher education system, all of these things together still create the ecosystem where we will be on the front edge of global solutions around climate.
Thank you. Very, I think really touched all the points I was looking at. Joseph, why don't we jump into some of the questions?
Yes, and thank you, Madam Lieutenant Governor, for that wonderful insight. One of the big questions that we've been hearing recently is what steps are being taken by you, your office, or Governor Newsom to ensure that we keep our California companies here and not leaving to other states such as Texas?
So I've been talking about this quite a bit because before going overseas, I spent 18 years in housing in Sacramento. And I know from having served in the private sector that we ask a lot of our companies. We ask a lot of Californians who succeed in our state. And the bottom line is, we need to deliver as well. And all those things that I just talked about, from public higher education, an educated workforce, quality of life, you all are in one of the most beautiful places, not just in the country, but in the world. I'm in Palm Springs today. There's just no place like it in the wintertime anywhere. We have a lot of gifts. The question is, what can we do to make sure that it is not we're not asking too much, that people say, I'm willing to give up some of the things I love about California because it's just too hard to do business or it's just too expensive. Now, one of the things that I talk about a lot is housing, and I have since I started working in the industry in my 20s. And the fact is that housing is expensive in California. It is going to be hard to change that in the short term. To give you an example, the median home price in California is $720,000. The median home price in Texas is $270,000. It's a very, very big difference. And so if you look at companies like Charles Schwab, who've been here for a long time, and Mr. Schwab likes to play golf in Florida anyway, and he's a Republican, that's where his community is. He had an excuse that was, and with more people working from home, and that happened. However, 20 of the 100 fastest growing companies in the world are headquartered in California. So this is not over. What I believe we need to do is, one, the governor spoke out very clearly and very loudly that he will not sign a wealth tax, that is not going to happen. It's important that leadership is not afraid to signal around things like that, because it's not good economic policy for our state, but it's sometimes hard for leaders to say that when there still is great need in our state among California families. So he did that. I think it was extremely important for him to speak out that way. But there are lots of other things. How do we make sure that we don't have overlapping, duplicative, and unpredictable regulation, such that companies that say, and they say this to me all the time, like, yeah, we're going to be good partners. We don't want to pollute the air. We're going to live by the highest standards anywhere in the world, and they do in this state. But we don't make it hard for us. Make it as efficient for us to be able to comply as possible. That is something that is within our power that we can do. So those are the kinds of things I know, Sharon, that you're focused on, that the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development are focused on, that my office is focused on. And then the other thing that I hear as well is, can you just not vilify business quite so much? I mean, and you do hear that. So one of the things that I do really try to do is go speak to chambers of commerce and raise all of these. And again, and I know the governor does as well, as he often says, you cannot be pro-jobs if you are not pro-business, right? That's where the jobs come from. So it's very important. I think we need to all take this seriously. We have very progressive tax policies in this state. About 45% of the general fund comes from the top 1% of personal income tax payers. That is something that if we want to continue to be able to fund that budget, that we need to assure that those who are making that cost benefit analysis say, yeah, it's expensive, but you know what? I'm proud of this state. I love this state. This is my home. I want to be part of this great big fifth largest economy in the world that is an incubator of diversity and help keep this California dream alive and make sure it's working for everybody.
Joseph, I have a few comments on that. Thank you very much. I would just add, as a legislator myself, I too hear some of the very same things you hear. You know, everybody's moving to Texas. By the way, I do have two sisters who moved to Texas and do have beautiful homes. The truth is, the data that we've actually seen recently, we have seen an exodus out of some of our more urban areas like San Francisco and Los Angeles. But the data is also showing that they're actually moving to the Central Valley and to the inland, San Bernardino inland valley. So yes, there's been some exodus. Second, with the pandemic offering people the opportunity, the remote working force to work from home, I think some people have taken advantage to more rural areas. I have a friend, a matter of fact, in Montana that said people are buying up sites unseen out there because, you know, even if it's 2 or 3 days after COVID, some major workforces are going to remain remote, as they've seen that can be an option. Secondly, housing. This is an area that I'm spending a huge amount of time in this space. There's simply, we aren't building enough. As you know, the production of California homes is minimal compared to what we need. And as you stated, when we have a minimal stock, the prices are going to be very high. And there's going to be bidding wars on these homes that do come, especially single family homes. And that's exactly what's happening. So we need to build more. And part of that equation has to be to look at affordable housing. And that always becomes a local council decision. And too often we have projects that are moving forward and people come out, they don't want them, and all of a sudden the project is tabled after going through a process for 3 or 4 years. And as you know, being in housing, that's how long sometimes these housing projects can be in the pipeline. The other part, as far as regulations and so forth, you know, there is an arm of the Democrats in the state that do feel like we want to protect workers. We want to make sure they have good working conditions, safe working conditions. We want to make sure they have a fair living wage, but we also want to balance that with a win-win for, as you said, for the employer and the employee. Because if we make it so difficult and they cut jobs or they pack up and move, then we're even going to have more issues. And we see this teetering right now with the unemployment related to COVID, but also housing related to the moratorium. So we're still in an area that's very tentative. And even though there's good indicators the economy is going to come back, we still don't know what it's going to look like for the most vulnerable in our communities, who have been hit the hardest, by the way, our frontline workers who are hourly wage workers. But we have to have that partnership with business and employees. There's got to be a win-win for both. All right, Joseph, next question.
Yes, and that was actually a fantastic lead-in. Speaking of our vulnerable communities, this question comes in from Edmund Valesco. One of the biggest problems we've seen is clean drinking water being able to get to our communities. Are there any plans for increasing our capacity to service not only our urban areas, but also the agricultural areas?
Well, thank you very much for that question. This is that's a really complicated, a simple question with a very complicated answer. The push and pulls around water are very real. You might have seen there were ads recently to against the Poseidon desalinization plant. The proponents argue we need the water. The opponents argue we don't want this. The twin tunnels of Jerry Brown has been reduced to one tunnel. It seems as though that is likely to continue forward, but there are still plenty of people who don't want that. Plenty of water projects around which there is a lot of disagreement, and it's hard. It's very difficult. I would say those are the two that are sort of on the front burner right now. But one thing we also know is we can be doing a lot more. Sorry, I almost sneezed. We could be doing a lot more in terms of conservation, and water conservation is critically important. But we've made great strides in water conservation, in particular in our farming, with new technologies to really target and reduce the amount of water we need. And this is, by the way, very timely question because it looks as though we might be heading back into another drought. So ongoing challenges, ongoing debate, but truly one of the most difficult problems we've had. And I spent some time, I spent a lot of time in the Valley, but one of my very first trips when I was running was down near Fresno. And I went with someone, a member of local government, who took me into people's homes and opened up the tap. And people were showing me, come in and see the water coming out of my tap. Brown, turbid water. It's unacceptable. So we have a lot of work to do. And Assemblywoman and Joseph, a friend of mine, Hai Pin Yin, just had sent me a message. So if I could answer her question real quick.
Yes.
So she's mentioning, rightly so, that we need to do more to better define anti-Asian racism and to make sure that Asians are included in all initiatives and talking points, particularly because the API community in our state is the second largest minority group. What is happening right now is so horrible and dangerous and wrong. And I will tell you, when I was overseas, and in Hungary, there was quite a bit of anti-Semitism that was rising back up. And this is a country that had one of the most horrific chapters of the many horrific chapters of the Holocaust. And one of the things that the US government would say is that the answer to bad speech, the answer to odious speech, is more speech. In other words, good people have to speak out. And that is within the power of everybody here. But the challenge got a lot harder when we had a president of the United States. And let's face it, that office is, people listen to our high elected officials. And the signaling around blaming China, Asia for the virus, a lot of people bought into that and became and have become very, this has put our API communities at risk from those who now seek to do them harm as a result of the signaling that came from the very top. We have a lot of work to do to roll that back and to reestablish in people's minds the importance of our open society, of our acceptance of one another. Our international enemies want nothing more than to bring us down by turning us against one another. That is the strategy of those who seek to minimize American power in the world. You're not going to beat us militarily, but you can beat us by turning us against one another, because we are all different religions, different ethnic backgrounds, different points of view. We have enormous diversity. And in order for the democracy to work, we have to get together. We have to work together. We have to respect one another. For those who want to make American democracy not work, finding ways to amplify division, that's their strategy. And so it's important for us to know that, and very, very important for us to push back against it.
And I'll add on to that. Some of you know that I have been a classroom teacher for decades, and really am on just a leave from teaching. At any time I can go back, and I have been elected for 2 years early on, and then lost in 2014 and was teaching 3 weeks later. So I in no way see it as a profession that I have left. But education truly becomes, at the youngest ages, part of what we have to understand. So we know that in classrooms across the United States, there's been a lot of talk about bullying. And so whether it's bullying somebody for, race, or it's bullying somebody because they're young and they're heavy, or because their identity as whether they're LGBTQT, there has been many episodes of this for many years. In Orange County, I remember we have Orange County Human Relations, which was actually funded through our county, and it would be an arm to bring in training into schools. We used to have it at our school, and they used to call the kids conflict managers, and they'd get a little clipboard and help make little resolutions on the playground. He took my ball, she took. But the truth is, we've moved away from a lot of that, whether it's funding. But I will always remember the executive director, who has retired now, but Rusty Kennedy. He said, if you are sitting there watching something, and now we could say filming it, because in those days we didn't have the cameras that are picking up a lot of this hate. you are part of it as well. And of course, jumping into the middle of a fight can be very dangerous, but what is it that you can do? And as you just said, Lieutenant Governor, it's speaking up, and it's not justifying it. And it's not saying, well, they did this. Well, it's because of that. No, something inappropriate, whether it's somebody calling somebody a name, whether it's a hateful action, that is what it is. And so when we look at just this week with the Atlanta scenario and saying, well, this individual had a bad day. I'm sorry, we all have bad days. But the point is, we can't justify what we see, and we have to do something about it. So again, I started with, we will stand together today in Irvine at noon, and also tomorrow at 3:00 in Fullerton. But a blind eye to these type of situations and justifying is what perpetuates them. And I too, individually, as coming from a large Latino family here in Fullerton, have had my share of comments made, not only to me, but also about my family. And my brothers have had it worse. And some things that you can't imagine. And yet sometimes people say, well, that's part of the job. And we have to stand up against it. All right, I think we probably have enough time for one more, Joseph.
Yes, I understand that the Lieutenant Governor is a little tight on time, but we do have a few minutes left. And since we were touching on education and going back to the classroom, I just wanted to know if you might be able to offer a quick answer for what do you feel about the efforts being made for a safe return for in-class learning?
Oh my gosh. Well, honestly, let me maybe just one or two things, and I'll turn it over to you, Assemblywoman. I need to go get on another Zoom. Okay. The worst day for me in this entire year was the day last spring when I talked to Tony Thurman, and he told me that kids were not going to go back to school in the fall. I am not an easily deflated person, but I was just, it was the worst day. And I am so concerned about our kids. I have two boys. They're a senior in high school and a freshman in college. They've been okay because they're grown up and they can work from home. I mean, they have plenty of gripes, but for our little kids, I just am so concerned about what it means to be out of school, out of the social engagement, and without getting, particularly those kids who haven't had access to broadband, to computers. So there just, to me, hasn't been any higher priority. It looks as though with the agreement the governor and the assembly made with carrots and sticks for school districts to reopen, with lots of money to be able to implement what's necessary to keep our educators and all the staff surrounding our schools safe, recognizing the extraordinary complications of some of our big school districts and multi-generational families that kids are coming and going to. I think we're really getting close now at this point, and I know many districts are opening with some in-person opportunities, but let me just say, it's heartening to see that it's happening. We're not there yet. There's no greater priority, and with that, on the details, I'm going to hand it back to the Assemblywoman. So let me just close by saying again, Sharon, just thank you for having me. It is so great to be with all of you. I absolutely love your district. It's one of the prettiest and
well, we can't wait for you to come to Fullerton to see the Titans and Fullerton College. They're literally a mile away, and we could do both. They're the high achieving in Hispanic graduation and women graduation. So we'll love to host you.
Great. I'll look forward to that. Thank you, everyone. And we're almost through it.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And those that are with us, I'll just wrap up here with saying I too am optimistic that we are going to have every day more and more students getting back to school for face-to-face instruction full-time 5 days a week. We know that local control, every district is making a little bit of different decision, but certainly by fall, not only our K-12, but our higher ed getting back to campus. And again, like we said, opening up, we got to get people back to work and getting them, some type of normalcy, back to the parks, back to TK and all of those things that bring joy to people's lives. But we are always a phone call away. Joseph, can you make sure you put our contact information in?
Yes.
An email away? Please, if you have any special events, we love to do certificates, whether it's scouting events, whether it's retirements, any of those things. We know that means a lot to individuals, but I want to give a shout out to our entire team. I can't see everybody because I'm on my phone, but I see our communications director, Joseph Holper, Lily Jimenez, who's Alicia De La Cruz. I believe we have Eddie Carmona, Amy Ramos. They are all our district team, Joe Pack, and they're here to serve you, really. And they do the hard work in the community, solving many, many EDD cases. Not all, they've been extremely hard, but that's what we're here for. We thank you. We hope you have a great weekend, and please join us on future breakfast clubs. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Assemblywoman, and for the Lieutenant Governor. This will conclude our virtual breakfast club. And we do encourage everyone to please be sure to see our live stream for our Stop Asian Hate press conference at 3 p.m. on Saturday. Thank you all. Take care.